Griffin, the clock has started. Yes, sir. Reading it loud and clear.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Discovery, roger, there, Bravo.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and welcome to the October 24, 2018 edition of Space News. This is Peter Aylward. Once again, I have Michael Abdullah and Angelo Di Grazia with me from the Space Association. Good evening, gentlemen.
G'day, Peter. How you going?
Great, thank you.
G'day, Peter, Michael, and everybody.
Fantastic. All right, we're going to start off with some local news. Rocket Lab announced last week it has selected Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia as the site of its first US launch facility. The company said it will build a rocket launch complex LC-2 there, adjacent to the pad used by Northrop Grumman's Antares rocket. The first launch from LC-2 is planned for the third quarter of 2019, and the company anticipates using the site as a boutique pad for customers who prefer launching from the United States. Rocket Lab's LC-1 site in New Zealand will continue to be the primary site for the company's Electron small launch vehicle. The state of Virginia has provided incentives to Rocket Lab, including a $5 million grant to help fund development of the site. Angelo.
To some NASA news. James Morhard was sworn in Wednesday as NASA's Deputy Administrator. Morhard, formerly the Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms for the Senate, was nominated to be second in command at NASA in July and confirmed by the Senate recently. He was sworn in at the US Capitol by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Let's talk about the space station. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine believes Soyuz launches to the International Space Station will resume on schedule. The next crewed Soyuz mission to the ISS was scheduled for mid-December prior to the recent Soyuz launch failure. Bridenstine also praised the work of NASA and Roscosmos personnel and emphasised that cooperation between the two countries in space is not affected by tensions on other issues. Meanwhile, Russia plans to carry out at least 3 launches of the Soyuz rocket before allowing it to be used for a crewed mission, which could resume as soon as early November. Sergei Krikalev of Roscosmos confirmed Wednesday that those launches, which would include a Progress cargo mission and a satellite launch from French Guiana, would provide more than enough confirmation that the problem with the Soyuz rocket in the recent launch abort had been corrected. Space industry sources previously suggested that the Soyuz rocket could return to service as early as November the 3rd with the launch of a GLONASS navigation satellite. Krikalev suggested the next crewed Soyuz mission could take place in early December, but there has not been an update schedule formally announced as yet, as the investigation into last week's accident continues. Earlier, Russian space industry sources said the launch of the next crewed Soyuz mission to the ISS could take place as early as November 28. An investigation into the launch failure that forced the Soyuz MS-10 spacecraft to abort is well underway. The Soyuz rocket remains grounded while that effort continues. A report into the accident and planned corrective actions is scheduled for no earlier than the end of this week. So they're really trying to get this thing going so that they don't leave the space station in any sort of jeopardy.
I wonder if it's the same bloke that drilled a hole in the Soyuz the other month.
I'll get to that. The Soyuz accident is expected to limit utilisation of the ISS for the near future. With only 3 people on the station for at least the next several weeks, there will be less crew time available for carrying out research on the station. Prior to the accident, NASA reported slightly higher utilisation of the station than expected. The agency's safety panel said, but future work will need to be replanned with few people available to do the work. Some experiments, though, are automated and may not be affected by the smaller crew. Cosmonauts may inspect the exterior of the Soyuz spacecraft currently docked at the space station in December. A spacewalk previously planned for November to look at the exterior of the Soyuz MS-9 spacecraft could instead take place in December, depending on when the Soyuz rocket returns to flight and is able to launch a new crew to the station. The station's crew patched a small hole in the spacecraft's orbital module in August after detecting a small air leak on the station, but what caused the hole remains under investigation. That revised schedule could also include 2 spacewalks in December on the US segment of the station that were delayed after last week's launch failure. Michael.
Okay, let's look at NASA Lunar and Planetary. As NASA evaluates proposals for commercial lunar lander payload services, it's putting out a call for payloads for those missions. NASA issued last week a request for proposals for lunar service instrument and technology payloads to perform scientific or technology demonstration work and fly on commercial lunar landers that NASA is in the process of procuring rides on. NASA expects to select 8 to 12 payloads next year for launch no earlier than 2020. Some scientists, however, are worried that given the lack of technical information about the potential landers, it could be difficult for scientists to propose experiments that would be compatible with those missions. Peter.
All right, let's go back to the US Air Force. The Air Force's X-37B has now passed 400 days in orbit on its latest mission, although, as usual, there are few clues about its activities. The spacecraft was launched last December 2017 on the Falcon 9 on the 5th flight of the overall program. Previous X-37B missions have ranged from 224 days to 718 days in length. The X-37B's payloads are classified, with the exception of a technology demonstration payload of a thermal control system. Mike, back to you.
Okay, China. China will perform a test flight of its next generation crewed vehicle next year. The uncrewed flight test of the 20-ton spacecraft is planned for the first half of 2019 on the first launch of the Long March 5B rocket. This is the same version of the Long March 5 that will be used to launch modules of the country's new space station. The new crewed spacecraft, capable of carrying 4 to 6 people, is intended for missions beyond Earth orbit, but could also be used for flights to low Earth orbit. Angelo.
Michael, what a year 2019 is shaping up to be.
Absolutely, it's going to be fantastic.
Chinese flying space capsules and the invasion of the moon to start. We thought 2018 was pretty cool. Wait for next year.
And 2019 is the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing.
Yeah, exactly right, which leads us into SpaceX, who's part of, I guess, the reason we're getting such excitement at the moment. But a startup satellite operator has ordered a Falcon Heavy launch from SpaceX. Swedish company Ovzon said last week it signed a contract with SpaceX for a Falcon Heavy launch of its first satellite no earlier than the fourth quarter of 2020. Ovzon is in the final stage of ordering that satellite and has paid Eutelsat $1.6 million earlier this year to move one of its satellites to an unspecified Ovzon orbital slot to preserve spectrum rights there. Ovzon joins several other companies and the US Air Force as customers for SpaceX's Heavy Lift rocket, which performed its first and, to date, only launch last February. That'll be pretty exciting when they start flying those things again. All right, Peter.
Indeed. All right, Virgin Galactic is preparing to move into the next phase of its flight test program. The company's CEO, George Whitesides, said at a conference recently that this new phase will involve longer burns of the Spaceship Two's hybrid rocket motor as the vehicle edges closer to space. Spaceship Two's last powered test flight was in late July, and Whitesides said at least one more powered test flight would take place before the end of the year. He declined to comment on statements made recently by company founder Richard Branson, who proclaimed that Spaceship Two would reach space in weeks, not months. And still in the US, Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft, passed away recently. Paul Allen, the billionaire co-founder of Microsoft, along with Bill Gates, who spent some of his wealth on space projects, passed away last week at the age of 65. He died from complications of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma after being diagnosed with the cancer 2 weeks ago after battling it for nearly a decade. Allen funded development of Spaceship One, the suborbital vehicle that won the $10 million Ansari X Prize, and later founded Stratolaunch, which is developing a giant aircraft to serve as an air launch platform. Allen's holding company, Vulcan Inc., said that Allen put into place plans for how his various ventures will continue after his death, but did not disclose details beyond that there would be no changes imminent. And that closes out our news this week. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you again next week, and it's back to you, Andrew.